Hello there, welcome to my review of the Rockford Files Season 4, Episode 6, Requiem for a Funny Box, written by James Crocker and directed by William Wyatt. The episode begins at the broadcast of a live TV show, where comedian Lee Russo is rehearsing his somewhat hackneyed act.
My ex-wife just showed up. You remember her, don't you? The dragon lady?
It turns out Rocky has dragged Jim along to this recording to see another comedian, Kenny Bell, who is trying to hire Jim.
Kenny Bell must be quite a fella.
I told you, Dad, I turned that down.
Kenny is played by a Columbo connection, Chuck McCann.
That Lieutenant Columbo was asking me all those questions about the monitors.
Who is the first act on and proceeds to do all the material we just heard Lee Russo was rehearsing.
I was backstage with Max, that's my wife, Dragon Lady.
My ex-wife just showed up. You remember her, don't you? The dragon lady?
While this might seem like an outrageous liberty to take, it was actually quite common in this era for a lot of jokes to be communal, where different comedians would all basically pick and choose from a selection box of jokes. However, not all comedians did this, and they would get quite reasonably annoyed when other acts would steal their original material. In fact, this situation is a bit of a twist on what happened to female comedian Jean Carroll, who had a joke she'd written stolen by Alan King. So, as revenge, made sure that she went on before him at a gig and did his entire act, so he had no material. In this case, Russo is furious with Kenny, who was his former double act partner. But there's really not much he can do now that Kenny's done the material on TV. Kenny wants to schmooze Jim into working for him over dinner, but gets a call offering him representation, so Jim, Rocky and Kenny's wife Maxine go without him, believing Russo was out to get Kenny long before the joke theft.
They were never very close, and now it seems to be getting worse.
Russo turns up at the restaurant, enraged, so Jim goes to check he's not about to assault Kenny. We find out that Kenny bugged Russo's house to steal his jokes, but Russo has been working for the mob, and it turns out Kenny may have heard more than just Russo's act. This is a fairly complicated opening with lots of layers, but does a good job of guiding you through it to the point of understanding Kenny is more talk than brains. He's inadvertently got in over his head and advertently dragged Jim into his mess. But on top of that, we also get to see that despite Russo's anger with Kenny, he still tries to protect him when the mob wants him silenced permanently.
Look, he can't say anything.
I can't take the chance.
And comes up with a less severe alternative.
All you gotta do is lean on him a little bit. He's not gonna say anything.
Not only demonstrating that this story is based on real-life events in the comedy world, but may be more directly inspired by Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis's double act.
They always seem so close in all them movies they made.
An unwitting Jim continues to follow his lead on the made man, Paul Sylvan, and we get the impression he might be ignoring Russo's advice and planning a hit on Kenny.
We take care of everything tonight.
Luckily, the next day we discover Kenny alive and well, although having been robbed of his funny box, his catalogue of jokes, which he wants Jim to make a ransom exchange to get back.
Did you file a police report?
Well, how can I do that? My business, you gotta pretend it's up here.
He'd do it himself, but he's got a big break set up in Vegas.
Don Rickles has come down with Vegas throat. They want me to fill in for him.
Jim agrees to make the exchange, only to find himself with a dead body, and for the cops to find him. Jim has the misfortune to have to deal with Lieutenant Deal, and Deal has the misfortune of having to deal with Beth. She can't confirm Jim's story though. As it turns out, Kenny was not in fact headlining in Vegas. He never left LA, and the body was Lee Russo's. Kenny wants to be kept out of it, but Maxine has a conscience.
I just can't lie for you anymore.
Unfortunately, Kenny doesn't, and denies even having a funny box or hiring Jim.
Oh, did you hire Mr. Rockford to make a ransom exchange for a funny box?
I never had one. So there'd be no reason to hire Jim to, ransom it?
He spins a yarn about Jim approaching him, wanting to be his manager, and insinuating that he might have killed Russo to impress Kenny.
And he said to me, hey, Kenny, anything I could do.
At this point, Kenny might be worse for Jim than Angel ever was, as Kenny comes with a modicum of credibility. He truly shows his worm-like nature when he lies to Maxine and comes up with a mealy-mouthed excuse as to why he can't help Jim.
I'm thinking about Lee, about the reporters.
From a somewhat complicated start, this mystery is unraveling really fluidly, as Jim finds out about Sylvan's mob connection from Dennis and works out what's going on. Something we've been given most of the pieces of already. Russo was killed because he knew too much and Kenny was supposed to be the one in the frame for it. However, his natural sliminess meant that he sensed something was up and so dumped it all on Jim, not realising that with him not on the hook for murder, the mob would still be trying to silence him. It's a fresh idea that really works as we get more and more hints of Kenny's untrustworthiness as the story moves along, as well as more and more plot threads being tidied up as Jim's brain whirs into gear. There's what seems like an odd detour as Jim is pulled over by a highway cop spot check, but the story begins to roll again when Jim confronts Kenny and explains to him just how much trouble he's in by trying to get Jim to take his place. When his funny box was stolen, so his gun, which was used to kill Russo, and Jim explains the mob weren't trying to set him up, they were trying to take him out, and blame it on a shootout between old comedy partners. Now terrified, Kenny explains that he and Russo were approached by the mob to make them stars, but only Russo took the deal.
They came to me too, the mob. They wanted to back me.
Jim doesn't entirely buy Kenny's tale.
That's the secret they'd be worried about?
Based on previous experience, but when he leaves, Kenny is genuinely terrified, and plans to try to get the hit called off.
I gotta call the heat off me. I got a phone call to make.
Meanwhile, Jim goes to talk to Russo's girlfriend, Laurie, and confronts her with a shocking twist.
Laurie, did it ever occur to you that Lee Russo might be a homosexual?
That Russo wasn't working for Sylvan, but was actually his lover, which is confirmed when Sylvan meets with his father.
Men who loved other men, these people were not in our family.
Who has been told all about Sylvan and Russo's relationship by none other than Kenny Bell.
I got a call from some scum named Kenny Bell.
This is a really shocking revelation to come about at this late stage in the episode, and one that recontextualizes the entire story. Now we know that not only has Kenny been a villain the whole way through, but that this is the reason that Sylvan killed Russo, to keep his secret, something he has now failed at. The scene with Sylvan and his father is incredibly powerful, as we see the hatred his father has towards his son in this moment. Sylvan points out that his father has no right to judge his lifestyle based on how they make their money, but this point is entirely lost, and while this might seem like the extreme reaction of the ironically very religious mafia boss, it would not have been far from a lot of people's attitudes then, and some now. It was incredibly brave of the show to attach this hypocritical, hateful, bigoted attitude to that of the villain and the head of a criminal underworld empire, not just suggesting but flat out stating that this is the wrong attitude to have. But it speaks to just how confident they were in giving their opinion as part of the drama, and why the show is as timeless as it is. Sylvan tells his father he will clean up the mess by killing Kenny and Jim, and destroying the tape that Kenny made. Trying to avoid this, Jim confronts Kenny to get him to admit everything to the cops, and is ultimately convinced by Maxine. but they pick up the tail of Sylvan and a couple of goons, losing them at the traffic stop that Jim was previously stopped at. This causes Sylvan's father to order a hit on his son, cleaning up the mess at his end instead. In the epilogue, we discover that Maxine has left Kenny, and Jim is keeping $2,000 of the ransom that Kenny promised to give him, giving the other 8 to Maxine. This is an incredible episode of television that might begin as a typical jerk client gets Jim in trouble, but quickly evolves beyond that. One that could have easily continued as it was headed, with Russo being killed because he worked for the mob, and them trying to silence Kenny because he knew, but instead adds an explosive but not exploitative twist that really pushes the audience. It comes with a message that if people weren't so prejudiced about homosexuality, then none of this would have happened. Not just the murders, but also Kenny's ability to be able to use what he knows for personal gain, or at least attempt to. The plot never allows the twist to get in the way of the narrative, nor does it allow the story to cheat. There's a danger that it falls into the bury your gays trope of killing off homosexual characters unnecessarily, or to victimise them to make a point, but I think it manages to avoid that, because the reason Russo and Sylvan are killed is not because they're gay, but because they have a secret that can be exploited. Of course, we don't know if Sylvan's father would have killed him even if he had managed to catch Kenny and Jim, but that's for the audience to decide. It's all incredibly well handled and plotted, and delivers a message without being preachy, and of course has fantastic performances throughout. For me, this is another 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.